The rapid growth of the now united Stone Campbell movement in the 19th century set the stage for a period of mounting tensions. With growth comes different ideas that make up the movement, and unfortunately it will lead to divisiveness. Ultimately, it will lead to a major division in 1906. You know, division is always a heartbreaking matter. My father was gospel ministry for many, many years, and he used to comment that if you're working out in the world among non-Christians, there's going to be conflict, and we expect that. But when you have problems in the church, church problems are the worst problems. That was his phrase. Church problems are the worst problems, because we really want our life in the community of the church with our brothers and sisters in Christ to be a place of peace and affirmation and comfort. And when there's divisions and heartbreak within the body of Christ, those things are especially sharp and hurt the most. Now, the issues that the churches began to fight about had to do with worship and evangelism. The question was asked, could you add mechanical instruments of music to the worship? And then another question, can Christians form organizations to coordinate mission work and other church functions? And these are the issues that became heated because of the events in the mid-1800s. And there were at least three issues that caused debate and division. First, the Missionary Societies. Can churches cooperate together, and can there be a creation of a parachurch organization, or an organization alongside the church that manages missionaries and manages the funds needed for the sending of missionaries? So Missionary Societies is issue number one. Issue number two is the use of mechanical instruments of music in worship. Is that legitimate or not legitimate? And then really the third major issue is just the Civil War. The Civil War divides a nation, and it divides and fractures a fellowship. Okay, let me speak briefly to each of these in turn. First, debate over missionary societies. There was growing interest in foreign mission work. Remember, the Stone Campbell movement is growing so dynamically, and good Christian-minded people realize that the Great Commission is an integral part of what it means to serve in the life of the church. And so they're looking at how to send missionaries into the foreign mission field. And this led to the creation of the American Christian Missionary Society in 1849, and the launching of a missionary effort to Jerusalem. They wanted to send missionaries to Jerusalem. Now, the thing that really caused a lot of debate, because everyone was on board with mission work, that's a good positive thing. But then it became the issue of, can we require churches who are local and autonomous, is it appropriate to require that a portion of their treasury, the money that is collected in the offering in that local church, can a parachurch organization require a local church to give a portion of their budget or a portion of their funds into this pool of money that the Missionary Society will manage? And if all these churches contribute to the Missionary Society, this organization, and you have a board of directors, and you have maybe not church elders, but maybe you have a board that manages this, again, a parachurch organization, an organization alongside the church that receives this money and then uses that money to send missionaries, so that you have, and then the idea, of course, is that collectively you can do more in this kind of cooperative program than individual churches could do on their own. And this became hotly debated because some said, well, you can't require churches to do that because that impinges upon our local autonomy. And then they also said, we're uncomfortable with the control of this money not being under the oversight of an eldership. That's a bit of a simplification of the issues, but essentially those were some of the things that were happening and hotly debated, and churches divided over the issue of is it right to sponsor or to be part of missionary societies, a missionary network, and is the creation and sustaining of these para-church organizations appropriate? Do we have authority for that in the New Testament? So those were hotly debated issues, and they led to a fair amount of division. Next is the introduction of mechanical instruments of music in worship. And we really credit L.L. Pinkerton in Midway, Kentucky, introducing a melodeon into the church building. It is said that it was a small church. The singing was so bad that the rats would run away in terror during Sunday worship. And to try to help that situation, they brought in a melodeon, a miniature piano. And it was used to aid in the singing so that it would be better. And that was introduced again in Midway, Kentucky in 1860. And it prompted sharp divisions. There was entire agreement in the rejection of the instrumental music from public worship. It was declared unscriptural, incongruent with the Christian institution, and a source of corruption. Many people looked back and said, we don't have authority for this. We have been specifically told to sing a cappella or in chapel style, that is with our voices. Ephesians 5:19 authorizes the heart as the instrument and our singing as the way that we should worship God, Colossians 3:16. And so we have division over whether or not this is a legitimate, not an expedient to help our worship, but is this an unauthorized addition to the worship assembly? And churches began dividing over the issue of the instrument, the mechanical instrument of music in worship. One of the illustrations that I sometimes use, I tell about when my wife and I were dating, and I wanted to give her a nice gift. And so I saved up and I bought her a nice pen, a writing pen, and I wrapped it, and we sat on the bench and we were in love, and I gave her this gift, and she was excited, and she opened it, and she was smiling, and she said, "Oh, it's a pen." She just was not that excited about receiving a pen as a gift. I thought it was great. She can write me love letters. Pens are fantastic. I like pens. I enjoy collecting pens. But her, not so much. And so what do I give my wife now for birthdays or Mother's Day or anniversary? I give her what she wants, not what I want. I find out what she's interested in, and I buy her gifts that will make her happy, not gifts that make me happy. And in our worship, we want to give to God in our worship only that which He has asked for us to give Him. You know, we may think lots of things are nice, and we can include that in the worship, playing the guitar or doing this or that. But the real question is not, does it make me happy and do I enjoy it? But is God pleased with this offering of worship, with this sacrifice of praise? And so it became discussed in the Restoration movement, but of course it is discussed very much today as well. In our worship, we want to make sure we give to God just that which He has asked for, just that which we have authorized in the New Testament. And when we look back, historically speaking, mechanical instruments of music were not part of the early church. They were not even part of in the Reformation movement. And so they were added very late from a church history perspective. And then additionally, we are hard-pressed to find biblical authority for that. And so many churches and many leaders chose to reject the introduction, the inclusion, the addition of mechanical instruments of music in worship. But this became a debated and divisive issue. All right, the third source of division. Missionary Societies was number one. Mechanical instruments of music was number two. And the third, really, is the Civil War. The Civil War was just so devastating. Sociocultural and economic factors created by the war produced animosities that fractured the movement. The introduction of the organ or the melodeon or the mechanical instruments of music and its flaunting by the more prosperous churches of the North after the Civil War. It was often the churches in the North that introduced the northern part of the United States, introduced the instrument, and this was offensive to the churches of the South. And part of the issue was, well, you all are wealthier, you won the war, and you can do this, and we're poor, and we can't do this. But it's more to it than that. The Civil War is just one of those massive events whose repercussions are difficult to map. Tendrils of effects spread out to every sphere of life. Divisiveness was just the order of the day, sadly. And the Stone Campbell movement started out as a unity movement in the opening decades of the 19th century. But by the end of the Civil War, however, the national divisiveness had so infected the next generation of the movement that the spirit of unity had been shattered and replaced by a spirit of partisanship. The development came at the very time when some of the other religious bodies in the new nation were being split over the issue of slavery. There was arguments about that within the Restoration Movement tradition, but many point to the fact that there wasn't necessarily much division because of the strong emphasis on unity and faith and liberty in matters of opinion. And so really churches divided not necessarily over the specific issue of slavery, but just the general state of fracturing that occurred because of the war. All right, these things are sad and heartbreaking. There was such strong religious unity. The movement was known for its unity. And so when we start to have these divisions, it's very sad. And they came to a breaking point. We point to the date of 1906 as kind of an official divide. And that's because when the United States Census put out its results, it identified a difference between Churches of Christ and Christian church. And so the official census noted a divide. The divide probably happened prior to that, but that's just an official time to mark it. And this led eventually to three restorationist streams. So in the divide, or after the divide, I should say, you're going to have Churches of Christ, and they are primarily a cappella in their worship, rejecting the inclusion of mechanical instruments of music in worship and rejecting the Missionary Societies. And then the second stream from the Restoration Movement river are independent Christian churches. Now, sometimes they're called Churches of Christ or independent Christian churches, but they are going to adopt the instrument, generally speaking. And then later on, several years later, after the 1906 divide, you're going to have the independent Christian church or the Christian church dividing again between independent Christian church and then DOC, or Disciples of Christ, the Disciples of Christ movement. Now, if you look today at those three different groups, the Disciples of Christ have really embraced Protestant liberalism and have gone pretty far away from those restorationist commitments and convictions. And the independent Christian church itself, there are a lot of varieties within the independent Christian church. Some are conservative theologically, though they may still use the mechanical instruments of music. And then in Churches of Christ, and we know that there's an increasing divide in Churches of Christ between conservative and progressive churches, ones that want to hold the line more in line with tradition and more in line with some of those core restoration principles, rejecting the use of mechanical instruments of music in worship, respecting gender roles in the church, and issues such as that. Well, we've covered a lot in this session today, and so this is a good point to bring our session to a close.